Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Michael McCarville. This is Fun with Fallen Flags, and this is episode 103. So, episode 103, we're going to talk about the miner's supply from Wild West Scale Model Builders. So, it's essentially this structure right here, and you know what? We're not going to go through step by step on this one. If you're curious as to what you need to do step by step, follow the last two videos. This building is really not all that different than the last two. This one's got some different options on it, and we're going to talk about those. Plus, we're going to talk about the options that we did. So stay tuned for that because we're going to go through this one step at a time for all the cool stuff that we did, and then we'll show you kind of a wrap up at the end of what the thing looks like when we're done. But to start with, let's talk about the front. So the front right here doesn't have a porch, and we chose to add the porch. Now this is an optional item in the kit, so we went ahead and added this, and I think it looks great. It adds a lot. There are some things in the kit that some people may not want to add. I think this one needs to be added. This is a mandatory. Let's talk about some more. Oh, and before I forget, because I know I will, there is a outhouse that comes with this kit. It's in the parts, and it's a completely separate build. Now, we built this already in an earlier video, so if you're curious about the outhouse build, go check that out. But we're going to continue on with the optional stuff that we did. Okay, so another thing, it's not optional, but I noticed it as I was going through the instructions. You can see the decorative pieces that are on the very top. Well, you can see, for example, just over the porch that we talked about, you got to add that. It's really not difficult. The only difficult part about the porch is lining up the board that is where the rafters go up into the false front of the building itself. So just kind of eyeball it and put the thing together. It worked out, but I did have to take some time to kind of measure that out. If you want to, you can count the boards that you can see over the windows, and you can see there's 4 of them. Go 4 up, and then add the that ledger board in there where the rafters go. So anyway, let's go on and talk about the details here you see on the front. So on the taller of the false front buildings, this is essentially 2 structures stuck together. So you'll notice that there's 8 pieces. There's 4 pairs there on the front. Well, on the sides, there's 2 little wing ones that go in there too. So you really need to add those. It doesn't mention it in the instructions. The parts are there, and you'll see it in the photos. But I just want to point that out. Add those because it looks very, very cool. I'll point some stuff like that out if it looks like we're missing something. So anyway, moving on. Okay, so the next thing is kind of a no-brainer. Wild West models, they configure their interiors and exteriors so that if you chose to do a window in an open position, half open position like you see here, you can do so. I thought I'd mention it. I chose to do 2 windows, one on each of the halves of the building, and I think it adds a lot. It's just a little subtle thing, but if you don't know that you can do it, it's maybe something that you might miss. It does mention it in the instructions, but I would heavily recommend that you do this. So on to the next. Okay, siding. So let's talk about this building itself. We're talking about a structure that's been added to over time. So this is essentially 2 buildings, but since there's an open doorway that runs between the 2, it looks like it's kind of an expansion to the original. So regardless, the siding, you're looking at the close-up of this side. This is all I did was 95% isopropyl alcohol and India ink. Now, you can play around with the solutions all you want, but I would test it. But what you're looking at here is a single coat of it followed up with alternating boards and some of the bottom section that got a second coat. So you'll see that it looks like it's you know, mildew and residue coming up from the bottom, and also different sections because there is no gutters on this building, so the water's just going to come down and fall on the ground or maybe come down the walls. So I would highly recommend that you weather the sides of this differently than the fronts, and we'll talk about the painting of the fronts and then the other building as well. But I just wanted to point out that it's really easy to get this effect, and it takes almost no effort, and really ought to do it. So anyway, let's talk about painting the structure. Now the structure is actually two structures together, and you'll notice that the back of it, it has the siding. There's the board and batten that runs down the smaller structure, and then the larger structure, all the siding is the same. It's all horizontal boards, not vertical board and batten. So what you end up with is some kind of cool effect, because you'll see in the next shot that this structure looks like it was originally a single structure, and it was added to by a little cheaper and probably easier to build structure. So anyway, let's take a look at that. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. So what you see here is you see the board and batten pieces, the back of the shorter structure, and then the back corner of the original structure. And what you really ought to do is choose some different type of weathering. So what you see is board and batten, weathered like we just talked about, and then the horizontal boards. And what we did for this effect was we stained it with India ink, just like we did the rest of the structure, but then we painted it and then sat down with a X-Acto blade and very lightly scraped off the coat of paint in various places. And what you get is you get this structure that looks like the paint's just fallen off of it. Now this is the back side. The front side is going to get more paint. So what you'll see is this side isn't looking very good. The front side is maintained a lot better. So the tar paper roof on the porch and the false front has a lot better paint job on it. So the paint job on the front, a lot better, a lot more coverage. We still worked over it with an X-Acto blade, and we didn't do as light a coat on the structure for the main structure, but you can see that this part of the structure is actually painted the same, but it still isn't 100%. I want it to look weathered. I want the whole thing to show some age. Okay, let's talk about the chimneys. So it comes with two chimneys, and there's actually some cap pieces. I opted not to use those. You have a little bit of freedom of what you can do. So you do have to either cut a hole in the roof or match the angle of the roof, which is a little trickier. That's what I chose to do. And go ahead and weather and paint and do whatever you want. Now I put a little bead of craft paint around it so it looks like it's got some a little bit of roofing tar to seal any of the gaps. However, I didn't use both chimneys on it. What I wanted to do is I wanted to show a little bit of variety on the roof. And you'll notice that not only are the roofs painted 4 different colors, so it kind of looks like it's been built out in different stages, but the main structure got a chimney, a brick chimney, and then the added on structure got a smoke jack that I got out of a basically just online. I went and bought a variety of those, and I picked out one that I had and I used that. So the chimney would look fine on the other structure. I just want variety. So this is what I ended up with. Now the T at the top was enclosed, so I had to drill that out. I just used basically an old X-Acto blade and just kind of carved it out. That's a little risky, so you want to take it easy. But it's really not difficult to do. So now there's openings, and then I painted the inside of that black, and the rest of it's all just covered with a Vallejo rust texture paint, and then that has bled down onto the roof as well. But now we've got 2 different kinds of smoke jacks, so we're kind of telling a story about this building. Okay, so part of the story that we're telling is we are showing that this structure has had multiple roofs on it and either repaired or added at different times. So the back porch on the smaller structure is 2 pieces of corrugated. Again, material that I had that I added to it, but rather than just doing tar paper for the entire thing, I wanted to do a little bit different look to this. And all this is again that same Vallejo rust color paint, and it's got some chalk powders on it with a little bit of the Wild West coloring, the Colorado rust purplish. I thinned that and gave that a wash and then went over it. And then there's a few little spots towards the bottom where you can see it's rusting out. So I highlighted that with just basically some rust colored tester's paint. But again, we're telling the story about this building. It's evolved over time. You can see the different kinds of sidings on it. You can see the different kind of roofs we have. So let's look at all the roofs here real quick. And what you end up with is backside of the building sees a lot more wear and tear. The main structure looks like it was probably had a new layer of tar paper over the whole thing when that building, the smaller addition, was added. Tar paper on the front, right over the front door. It looks pretty new, so it was probably done recently. Some of the back, not so recently. Okay, so let's talk about the front door. In this kit, there are a couple little pieces that are easy to overlook, and it is the doorknob and then the strike plate where the doorknob goes onto. They are very, very small. It's difficult to get the doorknob put together. It's essentially the head of a pin size, and onto a very small rectangular piece. And I used my reading glasses, a lot of light, and super glued that onto the rectangle, and then and painted it in the sprue, and then put it on the front door. Now, it's not a big deal. You could skip it easily and just put a dot of black paint. I know I've done that on previous kits too. However, it does make a very cool effect. So it's not an optional thing. It's not really covered in the instructions, but it is included in the kit. And if you'll notice on the photos on the instructions, it doesn't actually show it anywhere, but you can see it here. So if you're curious about it, just two pieces, glue the doorknob onto the little plate. I left them in the sprue, painted them in the sprue, and then cut them out and glued them on very carefully. I just used white glue just to get it in place, and then I came back with just a little dot of super glue just to anchor it down there. So I did use two different kinds of glues because I want to. It's easy to manipulate the wood glue while it dries and sets up, and then you can come back and anchor it down a little more solid. So on the next, let's talk about the floorboards now. Again, you remember what we did with the siding? Same thing with the floorboards. When you get into taking a look at what the front of the building is going to look like, we not only have little variation, a second coat of India ink and alcohol solution over a couple of the boards, make them stand out to get some variety, because it's basically just a big piece of laser cut wood. So it's easy just to color it one color and be done. But I mean, it doesn't take much to do this, and a little more soil staining around the doorway. You can see where it's been like people are walking in and out. So the edges of the boardwalk where they're walking off, there's a little bit more soil there. So you can go further with this, but I just chose to make it really subtle, and I just want the front of the structure to kind of tell the story that it is being walked on and it is being traveled. It's not pristine, doesn't look brand new like it just got built. You can also kind of see the front of this building, and don't forget we did India ink wash on the right side. On the front, it's been painted, but again, it's got a little bit of wear to it, so it is kind of coming up, and of course the open window. So let's move on. Okay, so let's talk about the inside. The roof, the main roof section is made to pull off. The two porches, you want to glue those on, but the little shed in the back, that roof is made to come off too. So once you pull this off, you can see there's a little pass-through in the center between the two rooms. Paint the rooms different colors. They were built different times. They were probably, the decor inside was probably made the choices at different times too. So I did kind of a light tan on the main building, and then I did almost a faint light blue on the smaller structure on the inside. So just gives it a cool effect, like there's two separate buildings. Now the shed in the back, I gave it a basically kind of a primer gray, and I think that between the three colors, now if you light it and detail the interior, it's definitely going to pay off. If you don't light it and you don't do anything with the interior, probably won't matter, but I like to take that step because I don't know what's going to happen down the road. Now you do have to make some choices as to where you want to put the door frames and the extra window frames. There's a couple extra. There's not enough to do the entire interior, and I think that's not a huge deal, but you could build those out of basswood. But you see windows on the very right outside wall. I chose for those to be covered, and then the backs of the doorways to be covered, just because I wanted anybody looking in from some of the most likely places that they would actually see some of that stuff framed. The pass-through doorway, I chose to use two of the doorways on either side of that, and then I painted the inside of that door frame with that same color as the doorway, because I assume that at some point somebody's going to be looking in and seeing that opening. So there isn't enough doorways to put on the inside of everything and then on the back, so I chose to take the door frames from the back and use them on the interior, thinking that it was a little more Spartan of a look on the back side by not having the doorways. So again, a lot of different options on what you do. Open windows, close windows. You can open doors. There's framing ideas and stuff what you want to do. So take all that into consideration and plan that out. So you can see what I did. I'm sure your choices will be completely different. Okay, here's a shot of the interior colors in the doorway, the pass-through between the two. Another thing I chose to do is paint the tops of the partition wall, the interior color, just kind of give it more of a refined look if you pull the top off. And as you work on the roof, one thing I would suggest is you're constantly test fitting everything, and modify the tabs that go into the roof on the tops of the walls, and give those things a little bit of kind of a bevel to them so that it's easier to guide the roof down onto those tabs. You can kind of see that here in the photos where the blue left side of the tabs have a little bit of a pitch to them. I would definitely do that, and you're constantly test fitting before you're gluing anything. So one last thing before I forget, the back wall, I've really spent a lot of time working that over and getting the paint chip effect on it. I also had to paint the interior of the add-on shed on the very back. I wanted to paint that a separate color as well, thinking that it was added over time and they had gray, so that's what they used. And you'll notice that I painted the interior wall where over the door where I thought it was going to be, and then once I attached it, I actually had the position, so then I could use painter's tape that off, and then paint that wall. Now when the roof goes on there, it's going to match right up with that line, so kind of use that as your gauge. If you're going to paint the back wall with the same color all the way down, that yellowish color that we used, that would make it look like an add-on as well. So that's certainly an option too, and then you don't have to worry about the line. But anyway, that's it. I chose some of the materials I had, some of the extra pieces. I wanted a lot of variety on this structure, and let's take a quick lap around it, and I'll show you exactly what it looks like. that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I put some links and some details for this video, some of the steps and materials, etc., in the notes down below. So check those out. And until next time, happy modeling and take care. See you guys.